So welcome back to Send Searchlights. Thank you for finding the time to join us this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. I can't quite believe we're coming to the end of another academic year, especially here in the UK, with only a sort of few weeks to go until the big summer break here. But what a lot we've covered in that time. So we've looked at inclusive learning environments, speech and language, dyscalculia, dyslexia, EAL, neurodiversity. We've covered a breadth of different topics, and we've been really grateful to all the guests who've joined us. So if you have missed out on any of the episodes, we've had Becky Hawes, Dr. Helen Ross, Beth Morant, Pete Jarrett. We've been really lucky to have them with us who've shared their expertise and wisdom. And today we're going to be discussing transition. We thought that was appropriate for this time of year. Obviously that can happen, that can happen at any point for students, but maybe one of the more obvious occasions are those transitions between year groups or between different key stages, something that is coming up at this time of year. Before we do get started, just the usual reminders for housekeeping. Please do stay on mute, but if you do have any comments or questions or want any clarification on today's topic, please do pop your questions in the chat box so we don't miss it. We do try and look at those questions as we go along, but if we don't get to them, we'll follow up afterwards. And any new questions for future webinars can be submitted using that registration form, and you should get that after the webinar today, along with the recording of this one. We've also got a couple of links to share today, so you'll get those resources as well. So as I mentioned, our theme today is transition. So without delaying any further, I will hand over to Emma.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We don't ordinarily use a slide deck, but because there were so many things that we wanted to be able to share with you today, and we try deliberately to keep our sessions nice and tight because we know how busy you all are and how valuable your time is, we've tried to speak a little bit to the messages of transition, but also to put some things on screen. Now, we will make sure that this mini slide deck, and there are only a handful, is available to you as part of the registration process. It'll be in our micro site underneath the episode, so if you do want to come back to it once it's uploaded, you'll be able to find those resources there. So don't feel as though you need to be doing lots of screenshots, although you're quite welcome to do, of course. So we know that when transitions are successful, children and young people will thrive. They'll develop those new friendships, they'll maintain or even improve self-esteem, and they'll become more confident and engaged with the school and work, and get used to the new routines and the environments really quickly. And perhaps really importantly from our perspective, we'll be making sure that they experience high levels of continuity for curriculum with appropriate levels of challenge for their learning, personalised to them. But achieving all of that does require careful planning and collaboration, communication with families, with other schools, with other stakeholders, and in some cases those stakeholders might include external professionals, of course. And so the best plans are those that are made as early as possible. So we're very aware that you will have probably laid some really solid groundwork across the academic year, and we do know that different colleagues who are joining us today will be at different stages of the academic year depending on their curriculum. And so although our kind of lens is towards the end of the academic year, you might find that you're in a position where you can start to be planning a little further ahead. And so the other thing for us to bear in mind is that the success of a well-planned transition goes long after the actual transition itself. And so we're always sort of planning ahead for a learner to be thriving and successful in their environment. Now, today we're going to focus on a couple of key transition points, those that we perhaps feel are either very, very often part of our conversation, or one that maybe we overlook a little bit. But before we do that, I'm going to talk about transition in general. So Polly will be talking about that sort of move from the first stages of education into more formal secondary or high school education. And again, we're very mindful that our language might be quite UK centric. So there we've got learners who are moving out of a primary setting, so around about 10, 11 years old, into a high school setting where they go on to do their formal examination. So please do apply that thinking to the context within which you work. And then that point at which learners might be leaving education and either going on to further studies or perhaps even into the workplace. And that is just as important as our role as educators, to make sure that they are life already. And so Debbie will be talking a little bit about that. What we hope to be able to do today is share some practical tips and tricks for you and strategies. But we know that this list is not exhaustive, and we know that we are and joined by many experts who are doing this job every day. So if you've got some particularly tried and tested things, please, if you're comfortable, share those in the chat, because we want to learn together. So what I would like to begin with that general oversight then in terms of what it is that we could consider for planning transitions in general between learning settings. And as we say, this is something that's best to do as much in advance as you can do. But we also do need to bear in mind that although our focus as educators should be prioritised around the learner, it can be quite a challenging time for families, those processes of transition, whether that's from one school in a country to a country, or into a different country, or a learner who's just starting school for the very first time and leaving the home learning environment. So we do need to try and make sure that we're engaging families as much as we can and as early as possible in that process in order to build their confidence and familiarity, because those trusting relationships will stand you in good stead through their journey in your setting. And as always, and we get to so that we say this nearly every time we meet, it's not a one-size-fits-all model, is it? We need to think about the needs of every child as an individual. What are their strengths? What are their perceived challenges? And how can we support both in terms of their development through age and stage? And so using a graduated approach, we've used that language before, will help us to accommodate for each learner's needs as they build and create those strong relationships, both with us as adults, but also with their peers. So on the right hand side of your screen, I'm focusing my thoughts around that general transition about the importance of relationships. And we know that by developing those positive relationships peer on peer and between adults and other children and young people in different circumstances, the learner is likely to be more successful. They're likely to get that sense of belonging and connectedness with their environment for learning, which will enable them to access everything they need to by removing those barriers early. Now, there are a lot of different ways in which schools will support that relationship building. Many schools, through my own experience when I was in school, might use something called a moving up day. You might call it something slightly different, but this is essentially where pupils will regroup into their new class cohort, and they'll move up for a period of time, often an afternoon, and they'll spend that time with their new teacher in their new classroom. And a logistical challenge getting everybody where they need to be, but there isn't anything these days, is there, to stop us to think about the way that we could use technology in an innovative way to help that to be a more personal experience. So yes, there's still huge value in that opportunity to get into the physical space, but if we've got a learner who might be a little bit anxious about some of that change, or might need just some pre-exposure to environment and to the people, then what role technology plays helping them to become familiar with those environments within the security of their home learning environment could be really powerful. So a talking head from their new teacher, a quick video snap, a walking tour of the classroom to familiarise them with the setting, or even images can be really great examples of the way in which we can start to familiarise learners with that new environment. And then they would have access to those during that summer break, in our instance, to become confident or ready for that first day at school. Now, another great example does lead us neatly into our first of two key phases. As a past primary practitioner, I was based within a through school. So one of the things that I know that our teachers worked very hard to do was to build those opportunities for bridging projects. That's the third bullet point down there. And I've picked this one out because it might be that people are going, bridging projects? What does that mean? We've certainly not got children building although that wouldn't be impossible as a technology activity. But what we mean here is the type of projects that you could start with learners in, let's say, year 6 for us, so that last year of their first school, and then they could pick it up with their year 7 teachers and continue that activity once they return to school in secondary. So it gives them a really interesting, exciting theme. It's usually a really excellent springboard into that secondary curriculum, whilst framing it with the familiarity of the stuff they began in the primary learning environment. So Polly's going to dig into a little bit more about that primary to secondary transition in just a second. But before I hand over to Polly, just a reminder that graduated approach is no different to in any other aspect of inclusive education provision. So when we're thinking about a tiered support for transition, we thought this visual might help you to think about what we mean there. So that widest band across the top would be the type of universal strategies, those that could apply to all learners and benefit all learners equally. But then depending upon the breadth and depth of need for your individual, perhaps you'll need to put in something a little bit more targeted. So maybe there's a particular group of learners that might be vulnerable for whatever reason in their context that would benefit from that universal support, but also some targeted focus support as well. And then as we move through that inverted triangle, then we start to move towards more personalized or specialist support. And that's often for learners who have more complex needs, but it might not be. So hopefully you will be able to refine the types of strategies that you're putting into place to support those learners wherever they might be in terms of their need. So I'm going to hand over to Polly now, who will talk to you a little bit more about that primary to secondary transition. Polly.
Thank you, Emma. Well, as many as you might know, if you've joined us before, I was also a SENCO within the primary setting. Part of my role was to plan that transition that Emma was talking about, those logistics of moving classes to classes, and what each group was going to be doing. And that always began in earnest at this time of year. It was a really busy time of year to plan all that. And for many children, second only really to starting school, that most significant period of transition is from that primary education to the secondary education setting. And as Emma referred to, it's also a time of apprehension for parents. Within that primary setting, teachers are all very familiar. There's sort of a comfort knowing that your child is really well known by all teachers as they move through the primary phase. It does become a bit of an extended family, and that starts to change as you move to secondary education. So actually it can be just as daunting for the parents as it is for the children. And actually this year that's something I'm going to go through. So this is all very relevant at the moment. Interestingly, Daniel Sable, who's founder of Inclusion Experts, recommends that for those particularly vulnerable students, readying those families and students for that move on to secondary school can start as early as year 5, so that year before the actual transition year, to allow those relationships and support structures to develop. So that does mean preparing a child well over a year in advance. And again, just on a personal note, my daughter's school arranged taster days at local secondary schools earlier this year. So she's currently in year 5, so not quite at that point of transitioning across. But actually it was great to see how much she enjoyed it, how excited she is about that change. That might change as we get a little bit closer. But actually it's great that some of the mystery and the unknown of that secondary setting has already been addressed. Also, something else to mention, that while pupils are getting ready to change schools, in addition to those changes happening around them, they may also be dealing with the start of adolescence, and all that brings as well. So lots going on. Children are often very aware of the changing expectations that come with the move to a secondary setting. They're mindful that adults will be expecting an increase in maturity and that independence and organisation. The environment is bigger, there's more people, so lots to consider and think about. Some children may be anxious about how peer groups may evolve. So if you're somewhere where actually there might be a selection of different secondary schools to choose from, there'll be that anxiety around where their friends are going. Will they make new friends? Will they keep their current friends? How do they make new friends? So lots to consider alongside just that secondary education as well. There's so much, there's a broad range of things to explore. So It's therefore important to provide really explicit opportunities for them to explore those concerns and to ask those questions. So it's important that we provide strategies to empower them so they can navigate that new landscape. So as Emma's just popped on the screen there for our slides for the moving into secondary education, effective communication is vital for building those strong and trusting relationships. An embedded ethos of co-production where pupils, families, staff, external professionals work together to plan for that success of moving into secondary. Information sharing can be and actually should be managed over time, and it's about providing the right information at the right time. So for students, this could be sharing a teacher biography, they could be looking at the new timetable, looking at the reading list. For parents or carers, arranging a meeting so that they can share their perspectives, ask questions. They can talk about information and uniform requirements, looking at the school calendar of events, but this should be done over time and not all at once. It's just too overwhelming to have all this information sort of thrown at you at once, so sort of drip fed as and when appropriate is vital. And also let's think about visual aids. They're invaluable tools that help children to manage transition. They make those abstract concepts much more concrete and really helps you to retain the information as well. So when we think about what that might look like for secondary students, that might include a map of the school with their specific timetable. And as a previous teacher, it can be color coded. Love a bit of color coding, so it can be color coded by subject to make it a little bit easier visually. And for those primary pupils, that might include photos of new classroom, where you need to put things. So where did your bag go? Where did your lunch go? Pictures of teachers with name labels. All of these things help anybody at any age, really. I'm terrible at remembering names, so a photo and a name is really helpful. And often some schools create transition booklets that actually pupils can keep with them for as long as they need. So that's something that actually over time, students might not rely on as much, but actually it can be there to refer to. Just something that we used to do within our own setting, we always arranged two-way visits. So that meant that key members of secondary school staff would actually come and meet the students within the primary setting, and then vice versa, the primary students would go to the secondary. But it meant that pupils would be able to meet new members of staff, but actually within the setting that was familiar and comfortable to them. So actually they felt comfortable to ask questions that they might not have done if they were all in the secondary setting. Some circumstances might be appropriate to introduce a transition buddy. So that might be an older student but has similar interests that actually can operate as a bit of a mentor. And again, that might just be for the first few weeks whilst students are settling in, but it might be a lifelong friendship. So just lots of different points to consider. One-page profiles are a powerful tool for children. And actually families can play a huge part in this as well. So families can contribute to them just to help to introduce themselves to their new teachers. And that can include any information that the pupil feels is relevant and important. So it could include areas of interest, challenges they're expecting, strategies that work. And as students get older, these documents might become more targeted and put into more explicit transition plans that involve more input from parents, outside agencies, school actions. So again, something that can be built on as we go through. And for those children with specific needs, we used to arrange team around the child meetings. So that would include a lot of collaboration from many different services. So it might be teachers, it might be outside agencies, of course, parents and carers, and planning these meetings before and after transition, ensure that all perspectives are considered when you're planning and helping towards a successful transition. And I think one of the key bits from primary to secondary is that actually you plan everything beforehand, but it's continuing in that plan once those students have transitioned across to secondary. So something else that we used to do in school is we used to go and visit the students when they'd entered year 7 into the secondary phase. For a couple of months afterwards, we'd sort of drop in and just check in on them and check how they were doing. So they knew that they weren't forgotten from their primary phase, they had just moved on across. Now, before I hand over to Debbie, who's going to talk about sort of life after school, we are just going to launch a quick poll, and we'll give you a couple of minutes to fill in that poll. And really, if you would like to speak with one of our colleagues about any resources that we have, which might help support you with learners at key points of transitions, please do share your details. It'll help, we can then share any resources. So if you would like to get in touch, please do fill in that poll. I think it'll be launching any second now, so I'll just give a couple of minutes. They're like magic.
I'll just give it a few more seconds before I stop.
Thank you. Okay, whilst people are filling in the poll, I'll just finish up my little bit and just say that, as Emma mentioned, there are many different transition points. So we are now going to hand over to Debbie, and she's going to look at those further education and beyond transitions.
Thank you, Polly. Like Polly and Emma, my background is also in special needs. I worked in an SEMH all through school, which ranged from primary right through to post-16. We worked very hard with our students to transition them from year 11 or post-16 to further education, or in some cases onto the workplace. Early planning for transition is crucial, particularly for SEND students, and should begin as early as maybe year 8 or 9, and should involve a collaborative approach with students, parent carers, colleges, and support agencies, all of them working together. Good organisation is key to ensure a successful transition journey. Regular careers advice, giving effective information, support and guidance, whilst encouraging the students to explore their own interests, hobbies, and potential pathways. This will enable the students to have a greater understanding of what is available for them and allow them to work towards their goals in an achievable way, using their natural talents and skills for them to make informed choices. Work experience placements in year 10 can also be a valuable experience for students. However, it is important that these are very carefully planned and tailored and well supported for SEND students. They may require additional support, for example, one-to-one mentoring, social and emotional support, simplified instructions maybe, or clear, concise communication. Shorter placements in different settings can also be very valuable and beneficial to provide insights into different careers. Collaboration between the student, school, parent, and the business is essential if the student is to have a successful placement. Providing these opportunities can help develop skills, improve student social skills, and provide valuable insights into employment for the student. A quote from the Careers and Enterprise company is, "As with all young people, multiple encounters with work facilitates effective transitions after school. Young people with SEND are significantly more likely to be employed after school when they have had some form of work experience." Regular visits to post-16 settings are also vital in allowing SEND students to make a smooth transition from school to further education or employment. These visits allow the student to familiarise themselves with the new setting, get to know staff and key workers, build relationships to help them feel secure in the new environment, and allow them to understand the differences between the new setting and their previous one. Open evenings will give them the opportunity to meet their new peer groups and allay any fears of building new friendship groups. Good links with local further education colleges may allow some students to participate and experience day release courses supported by their teaching assistant from the school that they are currently attending. Arrangements can also be made for college staff to visit students to build relationships in a familiar setting where they are comfortable, so they would visit them within the school. Students with SEND need to develop essential skills, for example, good communication, problem solving, social skills, organisational skills, and they may also need support with independence and decision making. This will all prepare them for life beyond school. Students should be encouraged to take ownership of their education and their future plans to promote self-confidence and independence. It's a good idea to hold regular person-led transition meetings to guarantee that progress is being made and ensure that the students feel able to voice any concerns or worries that they may have. The support should be available throughout the transition and continue into the young person's journey into further education or employment. At the recent SEND conference that I attended, Sharon Legg, who is head of SEND at Hales Owen College, shared the following strategies to establish supportive transition practices between school and further education and bridge the gap between education and employment. All SEND students are encouraged to do 1 week of supported work experience in Year 10 to experience the working environment and also help them to work on their social skills. All students are encouraged to attend regular open events laid on by the college. The college also hosts advice and guidance sessions to ensure that all of the students' needs are met. The college makes visits to secondary schools to meet with SEND students in their own familiar environment. The college also provides taster courses for students prior to joining the college so they can experience different courses that are available. And the college hosts day visits during term time to enable applicants to experience a normal day within the setting and get to know the settings and find out where all the different classrooms are, the dining room, and get to know the setting as well. I will now pass you back to Emma, who's going to take you through the illuminations today.
Thank you, Debbie. It's been a jam-packed session. It's a little longer than we would normally run for, so we're very grateful to anybody who's managed to stay with us. The recording will be shared with you after the fact, but just in terms of finishing up with our illuminations before Debbie tells you a little bit about what to come back for in September, we wanted to make sure that we gave you access to some resources that could be interesting reading as an extension of today's conversation. So I'm just going to pop in chat 3 different links, and to give you a little bit of context for these, we're going to be sharing a recent podcast, and I hope all of those links will work in the way that I've put them in there. Oh no, the podcast hasn't worked. Polly, would you try that again for me, please? There's a recent podcast and then the blog. Polly's on it anyway. And these are all themed around transition. So the podcast is a colleague of ours who is speaking to two colleagues who are based in multi-academy trusts. Those are school groups in the UK, finding out about how they tackle transition when they're focused on literacy. And that makes for a really interesting listen. So we would definitely encourage you to have a look there. Anybody who's wondering about the kind of role that some assessments might play in supporting that baselining or benchmarking for learners, they go certainly into a secondary environment, then the transition conversation microsite could be of interest to you. Lots of different practical strategies there as an extension of the conversation that we've had today. And the last is a blog that I did write, and I will be totally transparent, as we were coming out of the pandemic. So it does have a little bit of kind of post-pandemic flavour to it, but it doesn't stop it being any less relevant in the main now for supporting learners who might be experiencing some barriers. So your SEND learners. So do take a moment to have a look at that as well if you think it might be useful to you. But for now, I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us for all our sessions this academic year. And we really do look forward to coming back to you in September. And I'm going to leave Debbie to tell you all about that. Debbie, over to you.
Thank you, Emma. And as always, thank you very much to everyone who joined our session today. And it was lovely to see so many people joining from so many different parts of the world. We will be taking a break from SEND Searchlights for the summer, but we are very much looking forward to returning on September the 16th, when we will be looking at well-being and attendance. Please keep your questions coming in readiness for our return in the next academic year, when we hope to invite some of you to actively contribute to the session by sharing your questions and thoughts live. So do continue to check that box if you would like to be, if you would be open to getting more involved. Finally, one last request before we finish. If you could spare us a few minutes just to offer your feedback by using the QR code that is shown on screen at the moment, we would really appreciate it. Thank you once again. We leave you to enjoy a restful summer break and look forward to seeing you all again on September the 16th. Thank you.